So, Belfast Confetti is set in Northern Ireland during the time that's now called the Troubles, a period of political street violence in Northern Ireland. And the poem really is trying to express that and what it felt to live in that situation. Um, how it does that is to express that violence and that conflict through this lovely metaphor that's used all throughout the poem, which is to use different types of punctuation. So that's one of the things we're going to look at, is how punctuation is used to express the feeling of being inside that conflict. And really the poem is trying to show you how it feels to have that military presence kind of invade your everyday life, and what it felt like to be in that situation. Before we look at the poem, we know that in the exam you are partly marked on your understanding of the context. So let's quickly have a look at some of the context behind the poem and how that feeds into the poem itself. The poem's set in Northern Ireland, and if you don't know, Northern Ireland exists as a form because it was separated from the rest of the Irish island after the independence of Ireland came about. So because a majority population in Northern Ireland were more royalist, they believed in the royal family, they believed in their identity as part of the United Kingdom, and they were largely Protestant, although with a pretty significant population who all those things don't apply to. They were kept as part of the United Kingdom, and the United Kingdom still to this day has control over Northern Ireland in its laws and its government, whereas the Republic of Ireland is a completely independent nation. It's separate to the UK. So what that means for us is that when we read the poem, we realise that the conflict is really between those two sides. Between, on the one hand, in Belfast, the street violence from the British police and the British military, and on the other hand, those people who are fighting back against that, those people who are fighting for Northern Irish independence, including groups like the IRA and other political street groups who would try to organise in violent ways against British colonisation. So what that means is that the poem really as a whole is about that conflict in Northern Ireland, about its identity and its independence, about whether Northern Ireland should be part of an independent Ireland or part of the UK, and all the conflict that arises from people's disagreement about that. So let's have a look at the poem. We'll read through it once, and then we're going to pick out some interesting language that the poet uses. Here it goes. It says, "Suddenly, as the riot squad moved in, it was raining exclamation marks. Nuts, bolts, nails, car keys, a fount of broken type, and the explosion itself an asterisk on the map. This hyphenated line, a burst of rapid fire. I was trying to complete a sentence in my head, but it kept stuttering. All the alleyways and side streets blocked with stops and colons. I know this labyrinth so well. Balaclava, Raglan, Inkerman, Odessa Street. Why can't I escape? Every move is punctuated. Crimea Street, dead end, again. A Saracen, Kremlin 2 mesh, mackerel on face shields, walkie-talkies. What is my name? Where am I coming from? Where am I going? The fusillade of question marks." So we see that in that poem we're getting a description of the city streets in Belfast, but also lots of interesting language that kind of in a metaphorical way hints at the imagery of violence and explosions and bombs and guns and warfare. So it kind of filters throughout the city. Let's have a look at some of that language. So at the start, we get the first line that it was raining exclamation marks. Really lovely metaphor. Well, we know that an exclamation mark is used to express panic, drama, extreme emotion, and that might be some of what the person's feeling living in that situation. We then get this description of an asterisk on the map. An asterisk looks like this, so it's almost like itself a miniature explosion, and here it might be representing the explosions on the map and the grenade and bomb fire that was going off at the time. We've got this phrase about a hyphenated line. Here are some hyphens. Hyphens are used to separate things. We know that the whole poem is about separation between these two communities. And here it's imagining those as a burst of rapid fire. You can almost see that burst of hyphens altogether look like bullets flying through the sky. We then get descriptions of stops and colons. Stops and colons are used to create pauses, to stop a sentence literally. We might link that in some symbolic way to the stops, the blockage, the kind of boundaries and borders that were being set up. Also the great stop of death itself. And then finally we get this final line, beautiful thing of a fusillade of question marks, kind of suggesting that even towards the end of the poem there's still many questions going through his head. He's living in a kind of mental conflict where he doesn't know where he fits in with all of this. So let's have a look at some of the other interesting words. You could look at all those 6 interesting instances of punctuation marks as one kind of extended metaphor. That would make a great paragraph on an essay to talk about all of those. But some of the language that's used, we get this reference to a labyrinth. We know from studying Greek myth, labyrinths are enormous, complex mazes. And perhaps this is how he feels going through this city of Belfast, feeling the sense that he's lost and confused and doesn't know his way anymore. In the Greek myth, the labyrinth held at its centre a great minotaur, a monster. And so we get a sense of fear from that reference as well. We get these references to the streets in Belfast, Balaclava, Raglan, Inkerman. These are all names of streets, Balaclava Street, Raglan Street. And all these are named after military escapades in the Crimean War. So these are actually real streets in Belfast, but they get their names from British wars, like the Battle of Balaclava or the Battle of Inkerman, or Raglan, important military figure in the Crimean War. So all of this together is interesting because it's almost an interesting, ironic reference to how Ireland doesn't really, in this example, have its own clear identity. It's almost got a forced identity that's been put upon it by British colonisation. And it also shows some of the battles of the past. The Crimean War, of course, is what we discuss when we read The Charge of the Light Brigade. Then at the end we get this reference to the Kremlin 2 mesh and face shields. These are more military terminologies. This is jargon that refers to some of the military equipment that was used and shows how they really are in a kind of war zone at this point. My favourite line of the poem is this reference to what is my name? It's a rhetorical question. There is no answer. It's interesting someone's questioning their name, much like Northern Ireland would be questioning its identity and its name. Is it Northern Ireland or is it part of the island of Ireland? And so questioning a name in this context has a kind of an interesting political implication. It might really be about a kind of independence. So, the most important thing when we come to write our essay is to know what we want to compare it to. We make a series of interesting observations about the poem, but we want to try and link them in. I think that there's some interesting comparisons here, might be with What Were They Like? What Were They Like, of course, set in Vietnam and showing the effects on the ordinary civilians of the violence that was occurring there in much a similar way. Charge of the Light Brigade, we've just referred to. Charge of the Light Brigade set during the Crimean War and would show a view of war and battle that has a lot more dignity, a lot more respect, as opposed to the kind of chaotic warfare that's happening in Belfast Confetti. Charge of the Light Brigade wants to honour the memory and respects the bravery of the civilians and the people who fought. Really, it's not the case in Belfast Confetti. Belfast Confetti, that you can much more get a sense of pain, chaos, disorder, whereas Charge of the Light Brigade uses its beat, its metre, as a kind of order. And similarly with Poppies. Poppies is an interesting poem because it tries to explore the emotional effects of war on ordinary civilians, exactly the same as Belfast Confetti. And just like Belfast Confetti uses these interesting metaphors, we get quite a lot of really interesting metaphors in Poppies about the songbird of the cage and about the poppy itself as a kind of a symbol. So go away, have a think about what you would compare it to, and try and make some sort of a plan for, if I was writing about this on the essay, what would that look like? How could I make links between these poems using some of the interesting language choices that we've just talked about? Good luck.